Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Riley, and today we are going to be discussing Eric Erickson, and his 8 stages of psychosocial theory, and then, of course, their application in the classroom today. Um, for this assignment, I chose Erickson because he was one of the only people that had a theory that covered an entire lifespan. And I just thought that was really interesting. Instead of only focusing on one time period, he focused on pretty much the whole life. So he breaks down some people's life into 8 stages, and these go from infancy to adolescence to late adulthood. When you look at it, some of the titles do change a little bit, but for the most part, it goes from infancy, toddlerhood, preschool, school age, adolescence, young adulthood, middle adulthood, and then, of course, late adulthood. I believe that this is a very interesting theory as a teacher and someone who is preparing to be a mom. I'm very interested to know how to handle certain situations or what to do based off of their age. I teach middle school, so sometimes I feel like I just want to talk to students as an adult, or I want to get on their level. But of course, using this theory really kind of humbles me and lets me remember where they might be and how I should be speaking in order to best help them thrive. So I definitely wanted to discuss Erickson on this. A little context about Eric Erickson. He was one of the most influential psychoanalysts of the 20th century. And of course, his work is still referenced today. It's still in classrooms today. He was born in Germany in June of 1952. And he was raised by his dad and his mom. But he discovered that his dad was not his biological father. And that really upset him, and it gave him a new spin on things. He actually kind of went through a little bit of an identity crisis, finding out something so insane for him at the time. And this is where the term identity crisis was actually originated from, was from Erickson. Now, he was heavily influenced by Sigmund and Anne Freud, and they focused more on the psychosexual elements. Eric focused on psychosocial developmental stages. Now, he worked on this theory for a long time. He had a lot of work behind him in psychiatry, at Yale University. I mean, he really knew what was going on. He focused his whole life on this, and although he did die in May of 1994, his theory and legacy still lives on and is still referenced very often. Now, like I said, his theory is one of the only theories that it extends over an entire lifespan, and it's broken into 8 stages. He describes the psychosocial crisis associated with each stage as a way to better understand a person in the specific time period for their own life. So, if we're looking at somebody in an infancy stage, we wouldn't approach things or handle things the same way that we might with school age or even middle adulthood, and so on and so forth. And also, their big challenges and their big crisis, it's not going to be the same at each stage. So he really approaches that. So each life stage has one potential positive and one negative outcome. And like I said earlier, when I'm looking at the book and I'm looking at different references, um, some of them, some authors change the titles of each stage. But for example, toddlerhood would be the same as early childhood. Maturity is the same as late adulthood. There are just many people that do tend to use synonyms. So I've attached this photo here. We have stage 1 through 8, and then of course what they each go through, what the psychosocial crisis is. So we have autonomy versus shame and guilt, trust versus mistrust, initiative versus guilt, an industry versus inferiority, identity versus identity diffusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. So now to get into these a little more, I've attached this here as a way to look at it a little bit more in depth. But while researching, I came up with questions that could help somebody understand what they were actually learning. So I'm going to go back to this picture. I like this a little bit better, but of course, this one is referenced on here. And the questions that I've posed to help understand each stage in life. We have stage 1, trust versus mistrust. This is when infants learn to trust the world if their needs are met, but they learn that the world is not always on their side if their needs are not met. So if an infant is not getting the care that it's taken or that it needs, it starts to get this idea in its head that maybe the world's not on their side. You have autonomy versus shame and doubt. Are the parents and caregivers, are they shaming their learning toddler for mistakes, or are they allowing the toddler to make those mistakes? That way they can learn and grow. You have initiative versus guilt in stage 3. How are these preschool children being handled when making mistakes? Are they still able to take initiative and try again, or are they kind of guilted? You have industry versus inferiority. Children enter society beyond their families. How do they approach this? You're no longer only with mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. You're with peers. How do they go about doing this? Stage 5, identity versus identity diffusion. Are they becoming their own person, or are they just wanting to be what everybody else wants them to be or what's popular? Are they actually figuring out what they want as a person or who they are? Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Do individuals choose to find someone and work to build those relationships, whether this is through friendships, whether this is through romance, or are they isolating themselves and being alone? Generativity versus stagnation. Are they moving forward in life, or are they at a point where they're at a standstill with little motivation and goals? They're not really making any effort to move forward. And then the very last one would be integrity versus despair, which happens in the latest stage of life. Does an individual regret their life, or are they happy with their choices? Now, something important to note is that all of these stages do build on each other. So you can't go through one stage without the ones before it. So I'll oftentimes, if we're having issues, maybe at the play age or the school age, we can look back at that infancy age and think, what was the trust versus mistrust? How were they raised? Were they guilted? Was there shame? Did they learn, were they denied? Were they learned that maybe the whole world's not out for them? So that's why they're starting to have those trust issues. But each stage really builds on each other, and especially the last stage at old age, because that's when one reflects and looks back at all of their stages in life. Now, the average person isn't going to sit there and break down each stage in their life this way, but this is just how Erikson does it, and it really makes sense when you look at it as in a timeline sort of manner. Now, his stages of a development, and I love this picture because it really shows them off a little bit. So we have the moody teenager in the middle. We have you have infancy and learning to trust, and then of course the reflecting at the end. But this theory has helped determine proper ways to talk to a child or an adult. I know for me, it's definitely helped me in my class when I have to stop and pause and think. This theory can help trace problems in a particular stage of life. So if we're, maybe at stage 4, school age, and we're having a hard time, did something happen in stage 1, 2, or 3 that ended up happening that hurt them? And then this theory has also set the standard for new theories throughout the years. So this theory has kind of set a precedent almost. It's a huge contribution to the psychosocial theories and just overall learning theories, which is really, really amazing, even though it's come out such a long time ago. Now, I can absolutely use these in the classroom just like other teachers. Hands-on activities and active learning. When I say something in my classroom, it's very easy, for students to not pay attention or not do it the way that I ask them to. And of course, that can be frustrating as a teacher, but it's important to remember praise over discouragement, conflict resolution. How am I talking to them to help them in this stage of life? Am I praising them? Am I allowing them to trust. With my particular grade, I am in an adolescence grade, so I see a lot of the identity versus identity diffusion. And, being a peer and a role model, which is a significant relation in that period, is significant for this stage. Um, so I can help them grow and become their own person. And then a lot of times they do have issues in their previous stages, and I can't necessarily fix it or help it, but I can be there and I can be understanding. So when I'm developing my classroom management, and as any teacher should, it's just very important to remember Erickson's psychosocial theory and how you can apply it to your classroom just in the way that you talk or the way that you teach and how you speak to certain students, because you are helping one stage in their life, and this stage sets them up for their next. And you don't want to be the obstacle that hurts them in the way. You want to be able to encourage them and push them forward. So I love Erickson's theory because it's not a theory where it just says, here, this is what we do right now. It's a theory that shows you how it builds and how it moves on. So it just shows you how important it is. Now, in conclusion, I also posted this picture. I love this because it backs me up on my how they build up on each other. It shows you just how they do build up, like a staircase. But Erickson's psychosocial theory is still prominent and used in classrooms today, and it's really, really important because it helps you understand how to help the individual based on the stage of life that they're in. And if you're confused about what stage of life they're in, it's actually based right off of age and the developmental period. So it's wonderful to reference. Now, each stage, once again, does build on each other. So there's no stage that's more important, but they are all very important to understand from beginning to end. So you can kind of make those connections and understand why something is going on the way that it is. Not to say that one stage is more important, certainly not. But with them building on each other, it's extremely important to understand how they work together and how they're all important as one whole, because they do represent one whole life. These are my references. I did put them in alphabetical order. You're more than welcome to check them out. There were some really great things, and my photos are from these references as well. But I have enjoyed researching about Erickson, and I hope that you guys had a great time listening to my presentation and are willing to explore a little bit more and maybe even look at these theories for your own classroom. With that in mind, enjoy the rest of your summer. Have a great afternoon, and I look forward to working with you again.